all the craziness. I love doing these types of webinars, and we're gonna have a lot of fun today. We're gonna be printing the whole time that we're doing this. So I'm going to be running around and talking the whole time. I'm mic'd up, so hopefully you can hear me pretty good. Again, if you can't, please shoot out a question to us. Raise your hand, all kinds of scenarios. I've got Brandon Schmunk and Sebastian Vermisky on the line as well. They're going to be helping us answer any questions that you may have and everything, and they'll also give me a call if there's something going on there. So again, let's start with just DTG as a process. The first process really that is most important about DTG is pre-treat. And we're gonna go ahead and do that right now. Pre-treat, what you need to think of when it comes to DTG is that pre-treat is like the screen in screen printing. So why that matters is if you don't have a good screen, you don't have a good film, you're not going to have a good print. Doesn't matter how good your press is, doesn't matter how good your ink is, or how good you are at pushing a squeegee or your automatic is. If you don't have a good screen, you're not gonna have as great of a print. So pre-treat is that for DTG. So a big tip, and we're printing on all-mates right now. So these are tri-blends, which typically you can have some issues with, but the way that the all-mates are manufactured, we don't have those issues. We'll go over that later. But right now we're gonna talk about pre-treat, just the process. So a big tip that I do is when I go to print, or before I go to pre-treat, I like to pre-press shirts, especially if you're in an area where it's really humid. So like where I'm at in Texas right now, it's definitely humid. And so what'll happen is shirts love to soak up the humidity, and they love to soak up the moisture in the air. So we're gonna remove some of that moisture now by pressing it for 10 to 15 seconds usually is what you're doing, okay? Pre-treatment settings, the heat press settings is going to be 340 at a medium to high pressure. We'll talk about that pressure and things like that a little bit more in detail in a little bit, but just kind of remember that 340 for most DTG is kind of a special number when it comes to heat. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this guy out, and now we're going to pre-treat. We're using, today we're using the Firebird FBX 100. Kind of show you a little bit of a close-up. This stuff is phenomenal. If you're using, they have versions of it too for Epson and Brother and a bunch of other things. So we're using this version, which is for DuPont style ink, which is what we're using today. And the is the Pearl Elite. This has become one of my favorite machines. And we'll go a little bit more detail on that. Now, as this is printing, what's interesting about the Polyprint, and this is a really cool thing, is you talk about moisture. What's just happened is that we've hit a limit switch. So almost all DTGs are gonna have a laser sensor to make sure that if there is any type of a fold or crease or something going on with the shirt itself that could potentially hit the print head, it's gonna stop it. So that's exactly what's happened. But I already sent it through and I know that it's fine. It should be totally fine. We just printed and everything went fine. What can happen when you're in a high humidity area and you're printing on cotton or something like a tri-blend, that garment can soak up the moisture in the air, and your fibers will go from like nice and flat to sticking up just a little bit like this. And these sensors are super sensitive. So this will happen on just about any type of DTG. What we can do with this one is we can actually override the height sensor so that we don't waste a garment or anything, which is a super nice thing. That's something to kind of look into when you're looking at any DTG, is little tricks like that. And if you're talking to someone, whoever it may be, ask them for real world tricks and tips. It's a huge benefit. So we just sent that back in. It's gonna do the CMYK, and we're gonna be good. I'm gonna come over here and just pre-treat this shirt. And I've got it set for the right amount of pre-treatment that I need on the shirt itself. And we've got a nice little spray. Now, I'm not sure if this will come up, but I wanna show you a trick. This is another trick / tip. So if you're taking notes, this is a great one. You might not be able to see it. No, you're not gonna be able to see it. But if you look, if you're here, if you look really closely, you would see that we have fibers still sticking up a little bit. So what can happen is, again, kind of going back to being in a high humidity area, or just most places, you can have this issue where you spray the pre-treatment down and you're gonna have some of these sticking up. This is the same thing if you're using a Wagner spray gun or anything. So how do we fix that? Is I want you to go out and get yourself a roller. If it says that it's for cabinets, for instance, that works great. This is one that Polyprint just sent me with the first printer I had. So I've had this thing for over a year, and you can see I've used it a lot, right? But a microfiber roller or a a sponge roller type of scenario. And all I'm gonna do is I'm just letting the weight of the roller, and I'm just gonna kind of roll this down one way. And what you'll see is that we're actually folding these fibers down, right? So I'm not putting any pressure on there hardly, but it's folding the fibers down just a little bit. So when I go to heat press it, it keeps it nice and smooth. Sorry, I'm out of the frame there. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this guy on. I'm using just regular parchment paper. We're gonna be slinging tons of tips, and this is another one. If you're in your shop and you're using parchment paper, this is great for screen printing too. And you run out, like most of us do when we're in production mode and going crazy, and you can't get any. Go down to Walmart, wherever, and pick up some of this stuff. It might look like it's backwards, sorry. But this is Reynolds Kitchen parchment paper. This stuff is funny. When we're at trade shows, if we ever, for some reason, run out, we go out and we get this stuff up. Works phenomenal, okay? So this is the Smart Grid, which is pretty smart. But anyways, again, just having little tips and tricks like that. I mean, I know these things because I've been in that situation more times than one, for sure. So we're using just regular parchment paper over here at the moment. If you have questions, again, throughout this whole thing, you can enter questions here on the GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see that there's a questions area. You can put those in there. So feel free, please insert those. We got Brandon and Sebastian are gonna be answering those questions as they come in. And also too, they're gonna chime in if we need to go over anything else as well too that we might be missing as they come through. So we're done. And a big, another tip, the reason why I like using parchment paper is because when you've pre-treated a shirt correctly, it will basically just fold off, right? I mean, it's gonna just float off is what I meant to say. If it's stuck a little bit, then we're gonna go ahead and kind of press it a little bit longer. So I know I'm good to go. As a whole, you can use parchment paper 2 to 4 times before you need to get a new sheet. So I'm just putting that off to the side. And 5 seconds, right? So 45 seconds, 340 degrees at a medium to high pressure. And I'm gonna go ahead and take this off, and we're gonna go through curing real quick as the next shirt goes on. So let me throw this over here. With this heat press, I can dress it if I want. That's kind of a personal preference. I do sometimes, sometimes I don't. Right now, we're just gonna kind of leave it as is. If you're not dressing a shirt, or if you can't on your heat press, what I want you to do is make sure everything's smoothed out. Okay, really, because the underside of that shirt can wrinkle up a little bit, cause problems for you. But no matter what, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to hover. So when you're looking into DTG, you want to make sure and get some sort of a heat press that can hover. So something like this, or if you're looking for auto clams, there's a couple of them out there now that have a hover option. We actually just put together a bunch of new packages. You'll see it on screenprinting.com, and they all have a really cool hover heat press, the one that I'm actually using right here. So definitely check those out whenever you get a chance, or if you're curious what we recommend. I put those together with Brandon and Sebastian, in fact, and our team has really done a great job at dialing those in. More to come on those when we talk about business too. So some sweet stuff going on. But I'm going to load this shirt back on here. Another trick, one of the things I like about this DTG, and there's a couple others out there that you can do this too, but if you can thread the shirt on a DTG just like you do screen printing, I absolutely recommend that. I personally like to do it because I'm a screen printer at heart. That's where I started, and I have a press literally right there, just off to the side. So I'm going to load that on here, pull it back, throw this guy on there, and then we're good to go. I always will tug. So again, any DTG that you're using that has some sort of a hoop like this, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we're good to go. Send it in, and see we've got a limit switch. So again, we're using a Polyprint today, but take these ideas and use them on any DTG you're looking into or you might be using right now. I feel pretty good about it, but the machine's telling me that I've got to limit up. So I'm going to come over here, make sure everything's tightened down a little bit. With this one, I can lower it just a tad if I want to. It's not going to affect the image because we're lowering it such a minute amount. So again, that's something that we can kind of play with. And it looks like I'm just getting all kinds of fun stuff here. I'll just make sure that's pulled down there. There we go. We'll just do a little bit of extra moving down. one big tip when we talk about that, in fact, when you get into doing DTG printing, one thing that is different with it than screen printing is going to be making sure that your medium, your shirt, is completely flat. So screen printing, what I'm meaning is when we load shirts on a screen printing press, sometimes we can have the seams on top of the platen because we're using pressure, or maybe we're printing in an area that the seam is not. It's not really that big of a deal. With DTG, we kind of can't do that. So a big thing that I always talk about when training people on DTG is make sure that when you're loading shirts on, that you're using the right platen size, and that we don't have any of like shoulder seams or anything like that kind of sitting on top. Because what will happen is you'll have to lower your height adjustment a lot so that it can fully go into the machine, and then your designs will look blurry. Is kind of a big thing. So we don't want to do that, right? All right, let's jump back over here to curing. So we've been hovering for a long time on this guy. Usually what you want to do when you're curing DTG is hover for 30 seconds. And then depending on, if it's an Epson, a Brother, or DuPont ink style system, you're going to press for a certain amount of time. We're using DuPont ink here, so we're going to hover for about 30 seconds, and then we're going to press at a low pressure for about 120 seconds. Now, two things we're going to talk about right now as we're continuing to go. One is, can you use a dryer? Absolutely. I prefer using a dryer. Obviously, that's not an option for everyone. Gel curing and hovering these for a good little while, and I'm setting these off to the side, and I'm going to run them down my dryer here a little bit later. In fact, I think I can take this guy off. Let's see. I'll show you what we're working with. So I like to use this little guy. This is the Little Red X3D. Now, why do I like it? Why does it matter? Okay. The key thing about this dryer is it is electric and has really good airflow. There's a bunch of other cool things about it, but that's really what matters. So if you're looking into a dryer, it needs to either be electric with forced air or gas. The way the gas dryers work, you're good to go. We need the forced air because we're using a water-based ink, and we want to push that water vapor out to help cure it fast, right? DTG is different than regular screen printing water-based ink. It has to set in the dryer a lot longer than your standard water-based ink. Some people, what they'll do is they'll actually throw their shirts on a dryer. If you don't have a forced air dryer, this is an option. Throw your shirts on a dryer, and that is going to take care of the hovering that we would typically do for 30 seconds. So they'll run them through the dryer, and then they will come back and actually press them. So I'm just putting these off to the side, and then we're going to run them through the dryer. But again, if we were going to press it, we would want to hover for 30 seconds and then press for 120. I'm going to start doing another one, and we're going to talk about pressure. So 340 is what I'm using still. Same thing, whether I'm pre-pressing a shirt or I am curing my pre-treat or I'm doing the final cure as well. It's always 340. It's kind of my special guy that I like. But the pressure side of it can sometimes be a little bit confusing. I actually had some questions emailed to me about this before this webinar. And the thing about it is it's going to be different from each different style of heat press. So for instance, like a Stahls, for instance, a lot of people have Stahls. Those are phenomenal heat presses, and they go on a number system for most of them except for the air fusions. So that number is going to be 1 typically to 9. So a low pressure would be, 2 or 1 or even 3 maybe, but typically 3 to 5 is medium, and then 5 to 7 is going to be kind of a higher pressure. So when I'm using a Stahls, I'm usually around 5 for high pressure, 5 to 7, and then when I'm doing the final cure, I'm actually going to be at a 1 to 2. Sebastian, I see you over there. Did you have questions or you want to say something? Do we have any questions or anything like that at the moment?
Can you hear me?
All right, for some reason, I'm not hearing anybody. Let's see here. I'm going to double check. We're having a little bit of issue here.
Can you hear me?
Let's do this. So as we are working on this guy, I apologize. We're going to keep on rolling through though. I'm going to call our buddy Sebastian. So we pre-pressed this one again for a little bit too long, but that's okay. not a big problem. Remember, I'm pre-pressing to remove all of that. All right, perfect. There's Sebastian. I can hear him now.
They just won't be able to hear me, but that's fine. Can you address staining on shirts with grays and reds?
Ooh, phenomenal question. So let's talk about that. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Sebastian asked a great question about staining on shirts, specifically like your grays, your reds, things like that. A lot of times you're going to experience that just as you will with screen printing, right? So staining is a form of dye migration. And Sebastian, go ahead and mute me if you don't mind on your end. But staining is going to be a form of dye migration mostly. And dye migration is caused from high heat, right? Usually above 300 degrees, 330 for certain inks or certain dyes. But a lot of times it can start at 300. So obviously we're hitting that quite a lot with this. So what you can do is the first thing that we want to do is dial in what shirt we're talking about that's staining, because pre-treat is the other thing that causes the staining. And the amount of pre-treatment and how you're pre-treating it are what you're going to want to look at. So let's talk about the biggest offenders: reds, dark grays, navies, things like that. Usually what's also going to come into play with this is the amount of polyester that's in the garment. So you can DTG on things up to 50% polyester with the standard stuff, and then anything above 50% you're going to want to kind of play around with. There's a couple of pre-treatments out there you could try that say that they work with 100% polyester. I've tried them all. They work, but it's not really to what I would want to have if I was selling that final shirt in my shop. So I don't really use it. Anything above 50% polyester, I don't really DTG on. I go to Screen Print or something else. But 50%, 50/50s, a trick that you can do if you have something that dye migrates a lot is one thing you can do is the double pre-treat method. So what we would do is like on this system, when I'm printing on your average, like Gildan soft style, right? So if I'm printing on a Gildan, I want it to be a nicer one, but usually we're using kind of premium stuff like Bellas or Allmates. But when we're printing on something like that, I put more pre-treatment on because even if it's a ring spun, a lot of times it's a thicker garment, so we need to put more pre-treat down. So I have this set at a density, which is how much we put on, at 60. So that's a lot versus Allmate I'm at like 40, 45, right? So I usually have it at 60. If I'm doing 50% polyester stuff, I'm going to cut that in half. I'm going to spray it. I'm going to cure it. I'm going to come back, spray it, and cure it again. But the big thing on the curing is I'm only doing it for around 40 seconds or so. A big tip for whoever's asking that question: look at your pre-treat is the first step, actually. So the first one we want to look at pre-treat. Certain ones will stain a lot more than others. That's one of the things I like about this Firebird stuff, is that it does not stain very much at all. If it does, you're putting too much on, or you have too high a heat for too long. So this stuff is really good. Image Armor is usually pretty good as well. But so if we know our pre-treat's good, then we can look at the piece of apparel. And so if it's 50/50s, like I said, let's do 50% of what you're usually going to pre-treat it once, hit it again, pre-treat it again, or cure it again, excuse me, and then print. Now, the last thing when it comes to this dye migration thing is, when do you see it? Do you see it after pre-treat? If the answer is yes, then this is where we're going to fix our stuff within this pre-treat aspect. If you see it after you're curing, then we want to play around with that side of it. So the key on that one again is to think about pressure and heat. Usually people are using too high of a pressure, or they're letting it be under the heat and pressure for too long. So what can commonly happen with sweats, for instance, you press that for 120 seconds straight, you can have that dye migration issue. But what I do with sweats and 50/50s is I'll actually press it. I'll keep my heat press set at like 40 or 45, and I'll press it for around that amount of time, 2 or 3 times, however long it takes to get to that point. Some people will say that they'll do it at 60 seconds. Some people also throw it through their dryer to kind of do that gel and then press it. But really, at the end of the day, it's the heat press that is causing a lot of that with the pre-treatment. So start there after we've determined, when does it happen. So, because if it happens after, then we know it's this final deal. If it happens before we print, we know it's pre-treat. So that's definitely something that we're working a lot. I don't treat all maids different though. I pre-treat an all made just like I will because of how they're dyed. So the way that the polyester in this stuff is dyed is a little bit different, and we don't have that staining issue, right? We're talking about dye migration stuff. Now, another thing that people will talk about is the stain from the pre-treater, that square. The key factor on that too is going to be heat and pressure as well. And so one way to get away from that actually is the roller. When you roll a shirt, it will kind of push those fibers down and help it out a little bit. Another way is that double pre-treat where you're putting half as much on at a time. That seems to help. The final way, if you're seeing that square mostly after the final cure, is adding a dryer into the mix. So, and doing your final cures on a dryer. So in this shop, we do all our cures with a dryer, and all the samples that I do with Ryonet, we do them all in a dryer as well. Drop my hoop. So, the dryer is a phenomenal thing to add to the shop if you're really wanting to go after this. Now, it's not required. I'm not telling you that you have to have a dryer, but it definitely will help with quality. And it'll also help with production as well too. So I'm gonna go ahead and send this guy back in. I'm gonna check in with Sebastian here real quick, just to make sure if there is any other questions right out of the gate. We're gonna keep on going through, if that's cool. So keep on putting those questions in. Please let me know what you guys are thinking and what we're seeing. One of the things that we can go ahead and start talking about too is maintenance. Right, so maintenance is going to be a really, really big factor on any DTG, and then it's also going to be a big factor, you know, with the differences in the different DTGs. So we're going to jump into maintenance. Before we do that, Sebastian, do you have anything? The low and high pressure. Yep. Okay. Unfortunately, it's kind of a tough thing to really get that on each heat press. It totally depends on the heat press. So if you have a specific one that you're looking to work with, you know, feel free to put that in the questions or email it over, and we'll totally give you a call to kind of help dial that in. The other thing too is when you're using like a manual dial gauge, especially if you bought this heat press used, the sensors might be misreading on that. So that's kind of the tough part, right? What I can tell you though is when we talk about low pressure, I mean, when you're using a manual and where you're having to actually use the handle and pull it down, you're barely putting any pressure on it at all. When you're talking about high pressure, you're using kind of double hands, things like that. I know that's not very helpful as far as like being able to say low pressure is putting 20 pounds on top of the heat press. High pressure is putting 50 pounds on top of the heat press. I mean, you could say that if you wanted to, but again, it's different from heat press to heat press. So that could be a little bit more detailed conversation about the specific heat press that you might be having an issue with, because it might be the heat press itself. There's a lot of really great ones out there, but those sensors that actually sense the pressure commonly go out. It's one of the first things that will usually go out in a heat press, is the sensors, and then also the actual indicator on the front. Those things go bad as well too. What's another one? Sebastian, anything else? Yeah. Cool. Sweet. So he asked a question about the pre-treatment machines. And so let's go ahead. We're going to sidebar real quick because that's a great factor, especially since we kind of been talking about pre-treat. We'll jump into maintenance here in just a second. So let's talk about pre-treat machines really fast. So this is the Pearl Elite, for instance. Pearl's a cool company out of Illinois. I've used just about all of them that are out there. And what's tough about pre-treatment, when you first start looking into it, it kind of bugs you because you're like, man, it's just a machine that sprays stuff onto apparel. But there's actually a lot that goes into this to make it do it really well the same time every time. So the Pearl does a really good job at just being consistent, and it also does a really good job at having less maintenance than you typically would be. So I like the Pearl because of that, the consistency side of it. The other thing I like about it, you're not gonna be able to see it exactly from there, but you can actually set up what's called recipes in the system. So we can go in and say, I know that I put 45 for the density setting for all maids, and I do 50 or 55 for Bellas. So I can actually save those. So if you have people working for you or someone that you're putting in charge, you can easily put a chart up on the wall beside it or on the machine itself and say, select the Bella if you're using a Bella, select the all maid if you're using an all maid. It makes it really easy instead of having to manually go in or use dials and everything. That's another thing too, is the stuff that they make, it's all touchscreen, which is nice, but it's very easy to use. You don't need a lot of training on it. The only training you really need on these types of machines is going to be when you set it up for the first time. And the big tip on any DT or on any pre-treatment machine when you set it up is before you put the nozzle in and everything, go ahead and turn it on and run some water through the system without the nozzle on it. The reason why we want to do that is because sometimes in shipping and in storage, because sometimes we don't know how long these machines might have been sitting for a little bit, the tubes on the inside can get dirt, dust, and all kinds of things like that. So I always will run water through a brand new pre-treatment machine, and then I'll put my nozzle on and then run some more through it and kind of keep it clean. Daily, what I do with this one and any pre-treatment machine, what I recommend is whenever you're done using it, I take the nozzle off and I will put in a little cup of water. Inside these, there's a little secondary filter that sits right above where the nozzle is, and that just falls out too. So those go in a cup of water. They prefer distilled water is what the manufacturers will tell you. So definitely stick with that. And you can just let that sit overnight. And then whenever I go to turn on in the morning, what I usually like to do is kind of the same thing. I run some water or some cleaning solution through that as well. At night, the other thing that I do too is I make sure there's no pre-treatment fluid in it. This has a tube on the back so you can take it out, and any excess that's in the tube still you can just let drop back into the container and then run some water through it. So start up, there should already be water in the system. So we're gonna run that water through and then put our pre-treatment in. When I go to shut down, I'm going to take the excess that's on this one, take the excess that's in the tube in the back, and I'm gonna put it back into the container, and I'm gonna run some water through the system as well and take my my nozzle off and just drop it in the water. When I explain that, it sounds like a lot, but it honestly takes me like 30 seconds. And the amount that's in the tubes is very, very small. It's maybe one shirt's worth of pre-treat, so it's very little. Other machines, the issues that I've ran into, all of these pre-treat machines will run through nozzles, no matter what. Okay, so when you get into a pre-treat machine, have extra nozzles. I have like 4 on hand all the time because they eventually just do wear out. That's the key thing. They're like 10 bucks a piece with this one. Other machines, the nozzles can be more expensive. That's one thing I like about this. The other factor too is what it's made out of. So the stuff that they make this out of, it's like a type of plastic resin, I believe. But the key thing is it's not bare metal, and it's not going to rust over time. I've had machines that rust over time, and that causes all kinds of issues.
Hey Luke, can you hear me?
So key things to look at on a pre-treatment machine is one, what is the maintenance like, and how much do nozzles cost to replace? Because you will replace them, they just wear out. And then 2, what is it made out of? So if you look at some of the ones that are made out of metal and stuff, make sure that they've got good coatings on there. Talk to some people who've used whatever machine you're looking at. And then 3, the overall design. So like this one is fully enclosed. A fully enclosed version is great if you're in an area like this where we want to keep it really clean and stuff. There's some shops that run a bunch of DTGs and they have the open air, I call it, the open air version. It's going to be their PTM. It's a great one. It's super fast because you just throw the shirt on and go. You can stack up to, I think it's 12 shirts at a time and just blast through them. It's really great. Yep, I can hear you fine, Brandon. Yep, absolutely. What's your question, Brandon? The problem is, so Brandon asked, how long can pre-treatment go without running if you're a small shop? And the answer really, What you want to try to do is batch your orders is really what you need to do, because when you do not empty pre-treat out of a pre-treat machine, you can let it sit overnight, maybe over a weekend, but honestly, we don't want to do that, because what happens is it'll just start to gunk things up on the inside. Basically, pre-treat, you could think of it, it's not this, but it feels like the consistency of Elmer's glue that's been watered down a ton. So what I tell people is that if you're going to let it sit with pre-treatment in it for more than a day, just know that you're going to have to clean it, is the only thing. And if you're fine with that, then that's okay. But do not let that pre-treatment sit in the machine with the nozzle in it, because the nozzle will clog up, unless you're okay with just going through nozzles a bunch. So hopefully that answered the question. What I recommend when I talk to people who don't use their DTGs a lot, we talk about kind of batching your orders so you can do a bunch of them, maybe 1 or 3 days a week type of scenario. And then that way you can kind of just keep things moving for you, but preferably not too much more than a day. Yeah, Brandon? Yeah. Sweet, okay. So Brandon asks, when should a screen printing shop consider getting into DTG? So that's gonna really start talking about the business side of it. What I look at, if you're first off, look at your business. So if you're a typical screen printing shop that is printing for different types of organizations and businesses, brands and stuff like that, and you're constantly turning away jobs that are under 12 pieces, it could be a good thing to start looking into adding DTG, because it can answer that question. And so really what DTG in that aspect comes, it becomes a service, so you're able to continue saying yes to your customer, but you're doing it in a smart way. The real determining factor is time. Time is by far the most thing. A big question that gets asked is, how much does it cost, or how much does a print cost? Well, the print that we're doing today, which is an average size print, this is the one that I'm kind of doing here. So it's like 10 inches wide by 12, or I'm sorry, by like 14 inches long. It's going on a black shirt, which uses the most amount of white ink. This one, including pre-treatment, usually averages about 250. And that's kind of the standard, is 11 by 11 with this machine, it's about 250. Other machines like your Epsons are gonna be a lot more expensive because the ink is a lot higher and you have to use a lot more. Brother, the ink isn't that much more expensive, but you still have to use a lot. So that's where the number or the cost comes into play, for sure. So if we look at this 250 shirt on an Epson, it's gonna be like $5. And that same one on a Brother is gonna be similar to the Epson price, typically, right? Now, the time thing though is really what it is. So, and I don't wanna go too crazy in this, but let's go ahead and dive into it. When you look at screen printing versus DTG, you wanna look at kind of 2 factors. The first one is gonna be the quantity of what is being ordered, and then the second is going to be the artwork. So someone comes to you and says, I want 6 black shirts with this print on there, right? And so this guy has a lot of colors. Let's pretend though that this print only has 3 colors. Maybe we're really good at SEP Studio and we can get that down to like 3 or 4 colors. You're definitely not gonna set up 6 shirts, or you're not gonna set up 3 or 4 colors for 6 shirts, because the amount of time that it takes to separate the artwork, print the film, coat the screen and prep the screen, burn the film, wash out the screen, set it up, tape it up, and do your first strike off, you will have that job done on DTG way before then. That is the factor when you decide that you get into DTG. What do I do if I want to screen print versus DTG? It's all about time. And then that's also the factor when you're trying to decide to get into it. If you're saying yes to some of these jobs, or you're turning away so much of this, and 1, we could save time by being able to do these jobs on DTG, or 2, we could say yes so we're able to get more jobs, then that is when really the time is for you to add DTG to it. And then of course you got to start talking about budget, right? So that's why when it comes to budget, we put together these 3 new packages on screenprinting.com, and they start, I believe, and I apologize, we just put them together, but I believe they start right around 23, and then they go up kind of from there depending on what you're looking to do. And so it's one of those really cool things where that package is based off of what we've sold the mass majority of the time when we started up shops, or added things into a screen printing shop with those packages. What's cool when we talk about budget too, right now we just got the thumbs up from CIT to do 0% financing for 36 and 48 months, depending on the package. So that part is also super exciting and super cool, because that's always a huge deal. Is when I talk to people, the first thing that we talk about is this the fit for your business? And there's a lot of factors in there. Another factor is if your business is fulfilling online orders, maybe you have an apparel brand, or you work with other apparel brands and you fulfill their orders. DTG is a great source for that for two reasons. One, you could stock a bunch of blanks and you just print them as the orders come in. Two, you can use the DTG to do kind of sample prints or see what these designs will look like, and even use them for photography if you want to. So there's a lot of really cool examples in there. But once we decide that it's a good fit, then we talk about the machine, and then we talk about budget, because that obviously is a big factor in there. You know, and this 0% was a really cool thing that we got the thumbs up on. So I've been super pumped about that guy. Okay, so Brandon and Sebastian, is there any other questions specifically about business we can dive into right now? Otherwise, I want to talk about some maintenance stuff real quick, because that's a big factor difference also on DTG and some of these other ones that you might be looking at. Perfect. So one of the questions that Brandon said is, let's ask about how do we sell a shirt, or how much do we sell a shirt for? And typically when you're talking about one-off stuff, that's going to be very determining about where you're at in the country. But a lot of times, I mean, you're easily 25, 35. Even I've got some people even selling one-off shirts for $40+. And the key factor on that too is art. Who does the art? Where is it coming from? And such like that. I'm going to keep printing so we can just keep having things go. So usually the big average is around 25, 30 bucks a piece. And then it kind of starts to go down from there. When you get into, like, someone comes in and says, hey, I want a DTG shirt for $5. That's going to be pretty near impossible with a standard DTG setup. We're going to be talking more about hybrid here in the coming weeks. So when we talk about hybrid, that's definitely an option to get to that point. But as a whole, you're typically with a standard DTG shirt going to be on the low end. If we got $250 for the cost of the ink and pre-treatment, and let's say that we've got good pricing and we're getting a Bella for around $3, we're already in at $550 just on that material, and that doesn't take in our time. So typically you're going to be from like 25 to 10, kind of falling in there. And you can build in quantity breaks if you want, but really the difference with DTG and screen printing is because the quantity is higher, it doesn't mean that your costs go down. Your costs stay the same. The difference is when you have a higher amount, you can kind of get into a little bit of a production mode, so your time can be saved a little bit, but as a whole, your costs are going to be the same, and they can only go down so much. You know, getting into using dryers, for instance, allows you to get a higher output, so your time goes down a lot, and you can save a lot of time and money doing that. But that's really, you know, we can amp up production. We can get into bulk ink as well. That saves us some money, a good amount of money, in fact. But that's kind of the major difference there. So typically, yeah, you're looking at 10 to 25 usually, depending on kind of how your business wants to structure. I'm always happy to talk through people about that as well. There's lots of different businesses out there I've worked with, depending on you know, what your goals are and how you're wanting to really tackle things. So let's jump into maintenance really quick. Maintenance is not extremely tough. The issues with DTG and maintenance over the years have been, originally when DTGs came out, they were pushing some really crazy thick ink through some print heads that just, it wasn't made for that. And that's when you had all kinds of issues. Over the years, things have gotten a lot better. For instance, you know, the ink that we use in this printer is made for that type of print head. So that helps us a ton when it comes to the clogging issues and things like that. The second aspect of maintenance is you need to just use your machine. So if you're not going to be using it every day and things like that, that's okay. It's not a problem, but just know we're going to do a little bit more maintenance. So procedure every day. When I was running Epsons, the Epson F2000s, I did the same exact thing. With my brother machines, I did the same exact thing as I do with the Polyprint, which is The first thing you do with a startup routine is we're going to shake the ink, mainly the white. So you take that out, you shake it up for 15 seconds or so. This one's got 4 whites in it, so I grab like 2 at a time and shake them up. Then what I do is I will do a nozzle check. So that's basically where it's just going to print a quick little representation of just a tiny bit of ink per nozzle, and it'll show you if everything's firing correctly. And if it looks good, then I go into production, right? So that is my startup routine. Oh, got a little bit right there. So that is my startup routine. And then the second thing that I'll do is, if the nozzle check doesn't come out looking good, I'm going to do a print head cleaning. With most DTGs, you can usually talk about print head cleans in 2 ways. One is you're going to, on the top of this machine, for instance, just trigger a cleaning to happen. And a cleaning is just pulling some ink through the print head. That's going to push out any of the clogs and things like that. I do that, and then I'll do another quick nozzle check. It'll print off a little bit, and then I'm good to go. Then we talk about manual print head cleanings, which usually with this machine, I do it every other day. Some people like to do it every day or at the end or at the start of their day. It's up to you. That's something that I go through with all types of DTGs, depending on your use and what you're seeing. We can recommend different things, but a manual head cleaning is really where you're going to just wipe around the bottom side of the print head and just get all the excess stuff off of it. We're printing on shirts, not paper, right? So shirts have those fibers, and those fibers get sucked up onto the print head around the outside edges, and that can cause some issues and clogs and stuff. So you can clean that bare minimum once a week. Again, when people are printing a ton, they get into it to where they'll clean up to once a day even. And then the final thing is your wiper blade and your capping station. Those 2 things are some of the most important pieces on your digital printer, because the capping station, for instance, it basically is a basket, we'll call it, that has rubber gaskets around the edges. The print head comes and sits right like this, and it seals it up. So that way overnight, and when it's not being used, air is not drying out the print heads. So what happens though is ink builds up around the seal and can make it to where we don't get a good tight seal on it, right? So when that happens, it causes issues and we have clogs. Again, these are not huge issues. They're very easy to take care of. You just simply, with this one, for instance, I take a swab and I kind of wipe around it and clean it off. And then the wiper blade basically is a blade, and the print head gets dragged across the blade like so. And that blade just kind of, just like a squeegee to a screen, scrapes the ink, right? The ink builds up on the blade, so we keep it clean off. A lot of times when new users call me and have problems with, my prints are not looking great, things are not looking bright, a lot of times that can come down to pre-treatment or maintenance. And so really with this machine, for instance, what I do is I do my startup procedure, and I will do probably do a head cleaning where I'm just telling it to do it once a day. At the end of each day, what I prefer to do is I will clean the wiper blade and the capping station. I like to do it at the end of each day. It literally takes like 30 seconds. And then when it's really hot in the shop, or when I'm printing a ton, I'll clean around the print head, every other day usually, or I'm doing it kind of once a week, depending on when I'm doing it. But again, like cleaning around the print head is going to take me like a minute. Doing the capping station and wiper blade is going to take me like 30 seconds to a minute. So we're not talking about a ton of stuff. The key that you need to know is with any DTG, when you get one, you're playing a game. The game is make that print head last as long as possible, which is another big question that you want to ask, is how long does a print head usually last, and how much does a replacement cost? Because you will replace a print head. It's not that these print heads are made bad, it's just they're a piece of machinery. And what happens to machinery is that it wears out. So when it wears out, which will probably be after its warranty is up, how much does it cost? And that was one of the things that we looked at right out of the gate with the Polyprint, was how much does that cost, and can I replace it on my own? And so something like this one, it's going to cost $900, and you can replace it on your own. An average print head for DTGs on the bare minimum will last over a year, unless there's some sort of a manufacturing defect, which then the manufacturer will take care of that for you. On the maximum, I've got I've got a brother machine that has been running the same printheads for 8 years, but now that shop is crazy meticulous about maintaining and going all over the place. If you can have a printhead that lasts 2 to 4 years, that's great, not a problem. But you can kind of budget if you think you're going to have to replace it, once a year. You can put that into the budget if it's only $900, for instance, versus some of these other machines. It's going to cost $2,000 for a printhead, or if you have multiple printheads, it's going to cost a good amount of money per printhead. So just look into that, and also look into other factors of maintenance. So the is a phenomenal machine. One of the things that was kind of tough for us was there is a thing called a maintenance kit, and basically it is the whole capping station and wiper blade in one, and you have to replace it every around 1,200 prints or so. And so for us, it was easily once a month. And so it's $100. So that was an extra $100 once, twice a month for us that we were having to incur in price. And with this machine and some other ones out there, that's not a wear part that you're always having to replace. And so I just replaced the capping station wiper blade in this, and it's been over a year, and that costs like $96. So that was a nice savings right there. Also with ink, it was a nice savings too. So maintenance, again, as a whole, you're going to do that. Now, the last thing about maintenance that you want to think about is dust your machine off. It's so funny, but I go into shop sometimes and everything is all nice and clean, and the printheads look so nice and everything, but the machine has a ton of dust on it. These are really fine printheads, and if you got a bunch of dust all over the place, that eventually will cause issues, and that'll make it to where the game is not going to go so well for you. So just keep your area clean. Like I said, like we wipe ours down once a week, and that works out great. So again, quick takeaways on maintenance. 1, startup maintenance is key for any DTG. 2, capping station and wiper blade are very important. 3, wiping around the bottom of the printhead or manually cleaning it is also super important. And 4, know how much it's going to cost to replace a printhead and any other replacement parts over time. Because again, it's not these days that certain DTGs are just bad at all. And most DTGs out there are actually really good, but they are machines have parts that wear out. So it's just a factor of the matter. And as long as you're buying a machine from a reputable dealer or good manufacturer, they're going to take care of you if that happens too fast, for instance, right? With your warranties and things like that. So another quick question that people had about artwork, but we're going to jump into Sebastian real quick. He's going to tell me a couple of questions that are coming through. What's up, man? So he asked, how long can a DTG sit without printing before you see head issues when you're not maintaining it? As a whole, what the answer to that is going to be is it kind of depends on your area a little bit, but like with this machine, for instance, a Polyprint says it can sit for 30 days without losing ink. However, and that is the case, I let mine sit for 6 weeks. It didn't lose any ink, but we had to clean it a ton. So the key factor is, I've let, on average, had plenty of people that'll let these machines sit for 2 weeks. And what they'll do when they come in, number one, if you know that's going to happen and you're a DTG user, call me because there's some tips I can give you. For instance, if you can put maintenance solution in the ink lines, or if you can soak the printhead a little bit, there's some tips that you can do before you leave it or when you come back. As a whole, though, like with this one, we can leave it easily for a week, 2 weeks, and when we know we're not going to have major damages to the printhead, when we come back or when we go to fire it up, we're just going to clean it a little bit more. But again, if you're going to let it sit for a good long while, clean it really good beforehand, soak the head maybe a little bit, and then when we come back, just know you're going to have to clean it a little bit. But that's typically the answer. When I come in on Monday, for instance, and this has been sitting over the weekend, it's just as if it's a normal day for me. I don't really have those issues. And a lot of DTGs these days it's going to be similar. But you start getting above a week mark, or like, you're going to go on vacation, or if you're a very seasonal shop, there's some tips and tricks that you can do depending on the DTG you're doing to help make that head last long. What's another question, man? Nice. Okay. So he asked how many washes before a print starts to fade, and that can depend on the DTG you're using. But as a whole, when you're doing wash tests, number one, you want to make sure that if anything is going to happen, it's going to happen after the first wash. Okay. So when we are dialing in a DTG, you print it, you cure it, it looks beautiful, wash it inside out, or don't just wash it like you would normal clothes. Usually people are going to recommend wash it inside out on cold, hang dry, but we know most of our customers don't do that. So wash it inside out because most people at least do that. And then if you're going to dry it, put it on like delicate setting. And if the print looks good after the first wash, then your curing is at least to par. Okay. Then we can wash it a couple other times. If done right, a DTG print should wash and wear, very similar to a screen print water-based print that has a white underbase on it, right? So that usually you're getting into things are going to start to wear around 10, 15 washes, even a little bit sooner. But the key factor is when you're going to see that you have issues with curing or pre-treatment, which is what creates problems of washing or holding up in the wash, is going to be after the first 1 or 3 washes. So what I always tell people is to, again, print or pre-treat and print and cure the way you think it needs to be done, and then let's wash it 1 to 3 times and see how things look. And if we have issues right out of the gate from one, then we need to go back. If we don't, keep going a little bit, but you don't need to sit there and wash a shirt 20 times to confirm that it's okay. That's basically where I'm getting at. There's a little bit of a false statement, but you want to make sure that it's not a false statement, but it's something that I think people put too much emphasis on. If someone buys a shirt from me and washes it 20 times and then calls me after the 21st time and says, "Hey, my shirt doesn't look as good as it did when I first washed it," okay, that's going to be kind of tough. Just as a person who's running the business, like, it's kind of a funny thing. I've never had that happen. If I've ever had anything, it's because I messed up something on the curing or on the pre-treat, and someone calls me and says, "Hey man, my shirt's washing out. It's looking cracked, and I only washed once." Like, what the heck? Send a replacement, okay? Because you did something there. That's typically what happens. What's another one, man? Go ahead and print another one here. So the question he asked was the speed of printing of Polyprint versus an Epson. What you're going to find is right out of the gate, when the Epson prints, it's going to print faster. It is a faster printer because of the way that the print head is built. So its print head puts down a lot more ink at once because the droplets are a lot bigger. So it is going to be a faster printer. There's no way to cut that to make this printer sound any better. The difference though that you'll find is when my shop originally got into using the Epsons, we wanted to use the inline mode, which is where it prints white and CMYK, which this printer has that option as well. But that inline mode is where the time saving is always shown. And the problem that we were having in our shop is we weren't getting the quality that we wanted out of that inline mode. So what that would mean is that we would have to print the white twice, and then we would have to print the CMYK, or we would do what's called, it would go print and then move forward on our white. So it's double time the white, and then the CMYK would just go normal. So at those times in production of using that machine, it was very similar to this speed. This is called production in the RIP software for this one, where it prints the white underbase and then goes back and prints the CMYK over top. It does have an inline mode to where it prints white and CMYK at the same time. It's not that much faster because what you'll find with any printer that does that, it has to give the white a second for it to at least set up a little bit. And that's why you can't get as much down when you do it, because if you do, then the ink will puddle and your colors will just fade away. It's kind of an interesting thing. But what the key thing that you need to shoot for when you're printing standard designs on most printers, the full cure process. So that includes our pre-treatment, that includes printing, and the final print. On dark shirts, you should be hitting around 20 an hour. If you're hitting 20 an hour with average DTGs, then you're in a good spot for dark shirts. Now, if you're printing designs that are 16 by 24, which is the largest print size of this, you're not going to get 20 an hour on one machine, obviously. But your average 11 by 11, which is the average size design that most shops are going to print, you should be doing in total about 20 an hour. If you're not, we can kind of dial some things in. But realistically, too, when you're looking into things on a business decision, that's something to think about. What's another one, Sebastian? Cool. Okay. Sebastian, do you think it's cool that we go over a little bit? If anyone does not think so, feel free to jump off, but I'm going to keep talking for a little bit longer if that's okay. We did, yeah. Okay, perfect. So real quick, let's talk about artwork. So art, what we're printing here, for instance, this was just a PNG. The key thing with all DTG is we want to use RGB in the art file. So don't use CMYK. Even though we're printing with CMYK inks, the RGB color spectrum is a lot larger. Our blacks are much deeper. Our blues are going to be a lot deeper and brighter at certain points. So when you send or when you save a art file, make sure that you're saving it in RGB mode. Now, the second thing about art that comes into play is the RIP. So we use the CAD-Link digital factory version of the RIP with this one. And what you'll find with this version of the RIP is it is a more advanced version of a RIP. Okay, CAD-Link makes digital factory for not only Polyprint but also Epson and Brother, and I think they're coming out with a couple other versions. When I have people who purchase an Epson machine or a Brother machine, the number one thing when they call me and say, "Hey, how can I get more out of my printer?" that I ask is, "What RIP are you using?" If you're using Garment Creator or the RIP driver that Brother provides, I highly to 100 recommend getting an advanced RIP. This is the one that I ended up purchasing for my Epson, and then when we brought Polyprint on, the fact that they had a version of that for this machine, I was super excited on. The reason why that matters is because this RIP's job is to print that design the absolute best with the least amount of ink, because they're a software company. They're not tied to a printer company that sells ink. That's, call that what it is, but this RIP just does a really great job with that. The second reason why a RIP is important is because it allows you to set up what's called queue management. Queue management with this one, for instance, we can customize, the different templates that are set up. And basically, like for my wife's company, she has two companies now, but one of them is a custom baby apparel and women's clothing line. And so basically, we have it set up because she does all on-demand fulfillment for those. And we have all the different queues set up based on the size and color of the garment. So in the morning, she'll go through and look at all of the orders that came in and kind of batch them by size and color. And then she'll just drag the artwork directly into there. And what's cool is at that point too, we can manage our artwork a lot easier. I'm used to with screen printing, for instance, I would have, a left chest size, a full front, a back yoke, a sleeve. Anytime I would print a design, I would resave it, the separations like that. When you get into using a more advanced RIP, you don't have to do that. In this shop, we save everything because we'll never print any bigger than that. And we have one we call raw art file. And then that same file I can use in this RIP, which is the CAD-Link Digital Factory, to print on any size of garment. Because when I drag it into the queue, that is, let's say for a black Bella canvas, or black Bella canvas adult, I can easily use that artwork in that queue, and then another queue might say black Bella canvas youth. It'll automatically resize in place where it's supposed to go, but which is very fast and very effective, but it also makes it to where I only have one piece of artwork that I have to worry about managing. The last thing too to note is what art files will your DTG accept? And that's really going to depend on the RIP. So like this RIP, we can send raw Illustrator files, TIFF files, all kinds of really cool things like that. And of course, PNGs and JPEGs. But really, if you can print direct from Photoshop, Corel, Illustrator, or use some of those raw files with your DTG, that will always be the better option, because the more info, the bigger that file, the better it is for your end result. So that's really a big thing when it comes to artwork there. So any other questions that are kind of lingering or waiting around, Sebastian? Nope. Okay. Okay, so if it doesn't have the hover setting, okay, the question that he was asking was, what settings do you use for a heat press if it doesn't have the hover setting? So what you'll want to do in that aspect is, go ahead and press this one. If your heat press doesn't have the hover setting, what you'll want to do is throw it on there, and like hovering will help tremendously. So we need to figure out a way to make that clamshell hover is pretty much what has to happen. Or there are some machines that are a clamshell and they have an electric press or pneumatic press, and you can set it at the lowest option possible and it'll actually hover a little bit above that. So play around with your heat press. I've gone into shops where they've actually set it up to where there is a hook that it holds it down. Like all kinds of different scenarios. So figure out a way to make it hover, because what happens if you don't hover is basically your print's gonna look phenomenal right here. And you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I'm so happy because my DTG is rocking, right? Not just a polyprint, it can be any type of DTG that you're happy about. And then you go and take that print to the heat press and automatically put a bunch of pressure on it. The white will stick up from behind the CMYK. So a lot of people, they'll call me and say, hey man, my print looks phenomenal on the press, but then when it comes out of the heat press, it looks like junk. Like there's a bunch of white sticking up through it and all kinds of stuff. Most of the time, it is because one, they're using too much pressure and you're pushing so much on that the CMYK is actually kind of falling down and those fibers are sticking up before it cures. Or two, you are not hovering long enough, because that gelling effect, it gels the top layer of that CMYK so that when you press, it's kind of like a sealing to the white ink that is still wet below it. So it's a great question, but yeah, there's got to be a way that we can figure out to try to hover it, or someone's going to stand there for 15 to 30 seconds just kind of holding it halfway, which we don't want to happen. We don't want anyone standing still, right? Sebastian, any other questions? Someone asked if I use beard oil or moisturizer of any kind. Jeff, I love you. You're awesome. The quick answer is absolutely. It is phenomenal. And if anyone has a beard out there and you don't use it, get on the bandwagon. There's a lot of them out there. Specific questions. Spartacus Man, by the way, is phenomenal stuff on Amazon. $7. Great. Okay, so last little bit, we're getting ready to cut off here. Thank you all for hanging out with us. This has been super fun. Please let us know if you would like to do something like this again, and any specific things that you'd like to cover. I mean, so we can do something like this and just talk about Pretreat. We can do something like this and just talk about the business side of things. We can do something like this and just talk about art. DTG is a phenomenal answer to a lot of problems or issues that are caused in screen printing shops. The key to it, though, is making sure it's the right answer. So Sebastian is a great person to talk to. I'm always happy to talk people through that as well. We want to make sure that it is the right answer. If you're curious about it, please let us know. We've got a couple other people on the team who are also really well versed in this stuff. Again, too, the things you're going to be seeing from Ryonet is we have those 3 new packages out with a special financing 0% for 36 or 48 months. So take a look at those different packages. If you go on our site and just type in Polyprint packages, you'll see that. So again, thank you so much. I hope you got some stuff out of it. Let us know. Shoot us some messages. We'll make sure and follow up with you all. And again, this has been phenomenal. So unless, Sebastian, you got any other questions we got to get going on, then I'm going to get back to keep on printing these samples out. There is some questions. Ooh. Okay. All right, sweet. So real quick, and we can sit here and do this for a little longer too. So if you have questions you haven't asked, ask the question. If you're thinking about it, someone else is too, I guarantee it. So send it in. The question that was just asked is, what do you do for like polyester jerseys and things like that? go back to the fact if it's 50%, if it's above 50% polyester, just do me a favor and don't use DTG for that. It's not really made for it. White or light polyester, where you don't need to use pre-treatment, you can definitely do that. Or I'm sorry, where you don't need to print white ink, you can do that by using pre-treat. There's a special pre-treat for white shirts and 100% polyester that works phenomenal. But again, it's not for use with white DTG ink. So white polyester garments or light polyester, you can totally do that. Another quick side note, people ask a lot, do you need to pre-treat white shirts? The answer is no, you don't have to, because pre-treat is mainly geared towards printing on dark shirts and using white ink. However, you can totally do that and play around with it, because something like this is the Firebird FBX Vivid, super great stuff. There's some other ones out there too, but I prefer this. You can pre-treat a white shirt, and what you'll find is that your images will look more crisp, they'll look brighter, they'll last a lot longer when you're printing on a white shirt. With you don't want to use white ink. There's no reason to do that. You don't technically have to, but if you have a pre-treating machine, get some of this stuff. There we go. Get some of that stuff and try it out, or just another pre-treatment that's used for, that's made for white shirts. I'm gonna go ahead and answer this question because it happens every time I say this. If you want to test your own pre-treatment that you have on white shirts, what you want to do is just use, we'll say, a third to a fourth the amount that you'll use on your average dark shirt, okay? Usually though, when you use pre-treatment that's made for pre-treating with white ink on dark shirts, it can yellow the shirt. So take a junk white shirt you might have, because nobody orders them very little these days, unfortunately, because they're super easy to print. But take a junk one you've got, throw it into your pre-treatment machine and bring it down. Like on this one, if I'm playing around and I just want to do a white shirt, I bring the setting down to 20 when I'm usually at 60 for 100% cotton stuff. So you kind of use those methods there. I pre-treated exactly the same amount of time, and then we're good to go. But again, that's just as a tester, because sometimes it can yellow depending on the shirt. If you want to get into doing that as a consistent thing, get a special pre-treatment like this guy that's made for pre-treating white shirts. Anything else? Last call for questions, answers, or anything. Otherwise, again, feel free to reach out to us too. Yes, okay, so there was a really good question that just came through. What happens if you're not using a pre-treatment machine and you're using something like a Wagner spray gun in the beginning? So the question is there any advice on the dampness of it? And the short answer is, yeah, when you go to pre-treat on and you're using a Wagner spray gun or even like a spray bottle, you want the shirt to definitely see the pre-treatment on. You want it to look saturated. But if you take the shirt and you hold it up and a bunch of puddles start falling off, we've put way too much on. Or if you go to pick the shirt up and you feel that that pre-treatment is saturated through to the back of the shirt a bunch, and you can feel and see it, you've put too much on. The big thing that I like to do is I definitely, if you're using a Wagner sprayer gun, use this guy, okay? Because when you spray it on, when you put it on your heat press, you can go to roll it. Again, we're putting very little pressure here. If you put too much on, you'll see it'll start to kind of create a wave factor. And you'll see it being like oozing out. We definitely put too much on. A spray gun is something where you can totally use that when you're first starting out. There's a lot of methods to manually pre-treat. The thing about it is it's a very steep learning curve in dialing that in, and there's a lot of kind of feel and seeing into mind. So that's why the mass majority of people that I work with, if they don't get a pre-treat machine right out of the gate, we talk about, okay, can we put a budget together to where you get one within the next 3 to 6 months? Because you absolutely will want to if you want to get into any sort of production. And if your goal is to grow your shop, think of training aspects. It's a lot easier to train someone on a machine to say, hey, if it's this garment, press this button. If it's that garment, press that button. Versus, okay, when you come over here to pre-treat, you spray it like this and you spray it like that. You stand on one foot, like everyone's got their special way. That can be super hard to train. So do you need a pre-treat machine right out of the gate? No, you can totally do a couple of methods. But I always recommend, if you can, plan for it to be in the budget within the first couple of months. What's another one? Sorry, he's telling me all the questions here. Okay, Sebastian says we're good. So again, thank you guys so much. This has been super fun. I really appreciate all the feedback. Please send us some more feedback. If you have any other questions, feel free to give us a call at Ryonet. Reach out to us on screenprinting.com. We'll be sending out some more information and a recap of this as well to everyone. Feel free to share it and make sure and give us a like on social media somewhere. But if you are interested in anything else specifically, whether it's about Polyprint, you have a DTG, you're just curious, you're running into some issues, please reach out, okay? Because it's a really cool medium. It's a cool way of doing printing. And it's one of those things where we can help you dial in your existing setup or what you're looking to do, even if that has nothing to do with the equipment that I'm showing here today. Always happy to help out. So reach out to us. My name is Luke. We're here with Ryonet. Thank you all so much. Y'all have a great rest of your Wednesday. It's a Tuesday. Oh my gosh, that was so cool, and then I messed that up. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Man, that was such a good sign off. See y'all.